Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Shelter Rock. I am Nancy Reed McKee, the ministerial intern serving here this year. This congregation is also served by the Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore, Reverend Ned White, and Reverend Jennifer Brower. And all three are absent today because they are present at the ordination of Oscar Sinclair, who served this congregation as the ministerial intern before I arrived. So I know you will excuse their absence. And I want to take this opportunity to say farewell to everyone here. This will be my last Sunday with this congregation. Although I'll return here after the UU General Assembly this coming week, I'll only be here to pack up my office before driving home to Arizona. So I want to thank each one of you for making this year one I will never forget. I have felt welcomed and loved, included and encouraged by all of you here, and I can't stress enough the value and importance of having an internship with this congregation. And I hope you manage to resume funding this in your future budgets. As you know, this is a requirement for those of us going on to ministry, and not many congregations have the resources to make this possible. I'm grateful that I was able to benefit from your generosity and from the vision you have for the future, assuring that we have trained professionals to lead this faith forward. I'd like to call your attention to the calendar of events listed in the order of service. There's nothing really exceptional going on in the next week because so many people have left already and are going to the General Assembly in Kansas City, where I will be joining them this afternoon. The main thing I want to draw your attention to is that the collection today is going to the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. The NRCAT mobilizes people of faith to end torture in U.S. policy, practice, and culture. The campaign also organizes advocacy to end long-term solitary confinement in U.S. prisons and jails. Today's collection will go to provide for our membership fee for that organization. I also want to say that today we are remembering the third anniversary of the Charleston Massacre. Farah Chandu will sing a song written by Zoe Mulford. The president sang Amazing Grace for us.
Good morning. A young man came to a house of prayer. They did not ask what brought him there. He was not friend, he was not kin, but they opened the door. on that date and in that place, the president sang Amazing Grace. My president sang Amazing Grace. If you turn to hymn 205, we'll sing it together. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Thank you.
Thank you. We gather together in religious community to live, honor, and promote the principles of Unitarian Universalism. We gather to nourish the spiritual needs of current and future members, to grow a diverse and multi-generational religious community bound together with love. We gather together in religious community to commit our time, talents, and our unique resources to building a just and compassionate world, and to celebrate the joy of living, lifelong learning, and building lives of worth and purpose. This is the mission of this congregation. I invite you now to take this time to greet those sitting around you, welcoming new faces and embracing old friends. These are Our Dads by Amy Petrie Shaw. We recognize and honor today every dad who stood as their child shouted at them in anger or frustration. Every dad who tried to understand their child's clothing choices, new hairdo, and new tattoo. Every dad who suddenly realized their child might be right and was willing to listen, and every dad who honestly believed they were making the best choices that they could. We honor every dad who screwed it up and got it wrong, tried again, got it right, and often went back from being the dumbest soul alive to the pinnacle of brilliance, and then back again, all in one day, according to his children. These are our dads. We honor and recognize today all those who taught us what they knew and forgave us when we got it wrong. Those who wanted to teach us but left too soon or simply did not know how to teach at all. Those who walked us to the bathroom in the dark, and those who turned on the lights and waited up for us to come back on our own. Those who let us break their binoculars and steal their shirts, and those who taught us why it was wrong to break and steal. These are our dads. We recognize and honor today all of the men who taught us what it meant to be honest, even when it was embarrassing, to tell the truth and admit to our faults, to be human. We recognize, too, those fathers who could not teach us these things because they did not know themselves, but who hoped and prayed that they would do better than they ever did. These are our dads. Today, we recognize and honor all of the men who have been there or tried to be there, no matter what. Those who have remained calm in a crisis, and those who could not remain calm but did not run away. And those who did run away but came back again, and those who never came back but always wished it could have been different. They are our dads, rich and poor, tall or short, slender as a pole or round as a basketball. They are the men who helped raise us and those who formed us through their actions and their lack of actions. They are our dads, birth fathers and adoptive fathers, stepfathers and foster fathers, fathers who have no children themselves but who step in to help raise a child of a neighbor or a friend, grandfathers and uncles, single moms who have had to learn to go beyond motherhood, trans dads who have given birth and trans dads who didn't, queer dads and gay dads and female partners willing to take on the role. They are our dads. Through love and hatred, joy and tears, addiction, mental health issues, perfect health, sickness, aging, wealth and poverty, absence and presence, they are our dads. They are because of us, and we are because of them. They are our dads. We light this chalice today to honor our dads, our fathers. I invite you to rise as you are willing and or able to join in singing today from the Teal Hymnal, hymn number 1074, Turn the World Around. Please remain standing and join me in reading our words of affirmation that are written in the order of service. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, this do we affirm in covenant with each other. Please be seated.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can marry. Look at me, I am old, but I'm happy. I was once like you are now, and I know that it's not easy to recall when you found something going on. But take your time, think a lot, think of everything you got, for you still be here tomorrow, but your dreams may not. How can I try to explain when I do, he turns away again? It's always been the same old story. From the moment I could talk, I was ordered to listen. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go. It's not time to make a change. Just sit down, take it slowly. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to go through. Find a girl, settle down. If you want, you can marry. Look at me, I am old, but I'm happy. All the times that I've cried, keeping all the things I knew inside. It's hard, but it's harder to ignore it. If they were right, I'd agree, but they know not me. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
This morning's offering is for the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. The purpose of the congregation is to encourage all who gather here to grow more generous in spirit and action. And all cash and any checks not designated as pledges will benefit the NRCAT. Your gifts and donations are greatly received. Will the ushers please come forward?
So, I must have been 7 or 8 years old when I committed my first mortal sin. This was back in the 1960s in a small town in New Jersey where I lived with my brothers in an apartment above a tavern. My family would eventually grow to include 9 kids crammed into this 3-bedroom place we called home. But at the time, there were only 4 of us. The town's a square mile filled with white Irish Catholics, which meant everyone in town went to Mass on Sundays. Well, at least most of us. My dad spent his Sundays in the tavern below our apartment. My mom's excuse for not attending was all the child rearing she had to do as our family continued to grow. So on Sunday morning, my mother would line up me, my older brother Jimmy, and my oldest brother Billy by the front door. Our hair flattened, white shirts with the clip-on ties that always seemed a little too short. My mom would hand us each a quarter for the collection box and send us on our way. So my 2 brothers and me would set off to church, which was just about a quarter of a mile straight down the road from our house. And just like the previous few Sundays, we didn't go to church. My oldest brother Billy was always in trouble. He was constantly in fights and getting expelled from school. He also really hated going to Mass. He was the oldest, and he called the shots. So, about halfway to church, he would take my quarter, he'd take Jimmy's quarter, and along with his quarter, go into a grocery store and buy a pack of cigarettes. He would then take us to this low-rise apartment building around the back, down these steps, and into a laundry room. There we would sit for the duration of the Mass, watching Billy smoke cigarettes. Good. I remember being very scared. I remember thinking how wrong this was and how much trouble we'd get in if we were caught. I'd sit there and I'd imagine my soul, like a real thing in my body. And with all the bad things that I would do, there'd be a black stain on it, And this particular Sunday did turn out to be different. This was the Sunday we got busted. We heard the outside door open. We all looked up. Coming down the stairs, Officer Larson. Yep, everybody in town knew everyone else. "What are you kids doing down here? Hey, aren't you the Foster boys? Put that cigarette out. Aren't you supposed to be at church?" At that point, he gathered us up, piled us into his patrol car, and drove us home. He took us upstairs to my mom, and after explaining where he found us, told her he was going to go down to the tavern and tell my dad. As our mother scolded us for skipping church and spending the collection money on cigarettes, and us trying to weasel our way out of it, we heard my father coming up the steps. We knew it was coming. My dad burst in angrier than usual. He obviously was told the whole story. "God bleep it!" I'm paraphrasing here. "I've had it with you kids. Pack your bags, because you're all going to Boys Town. This time I mean it." Boys Town. This was my father's typical go-to threat whenever we did something bad, but this time he really seemed to mean it. For those of you who may not know, Boys Town was not just an old Spencer Tracy movie, it was a real place, run by the Catholic Church, which we heard was filled with orphans and boys no longer wanted by their parents. And there was an actual Boys Town just a few miles away from us. Whenever we took the bus with my mom to visit our grandparents, we'd pass it. I remember seeing it through the faded bus window. A long, high black gate, arched entryway with giant letters, "Welcome to Boys Town." It really frightened us, and my dad knew this. But this was one of the worst crimes a little Catholic boy could do, so we ramped it up accordingly. "You kids think I'm kidding? Not this time. I want you to pack your bags right now. I called Boys Town from the bar. They're sending someone over in 10 minutes, so pack your bags because you're all going to live in Boys Town." As we screamed and cried, begging our mother not to send us away, we pulled out from under one of the beds what was the family's only suitcase. As we never went on vacation, this was rarely used, except for when my brothers and I pretended to go on vacation, or that time we once locked my little baby brother inside. But now we're packing our clothes, sobbing and hoping my dad would finally say this is just a warning. Then we heard it. The knock on the door. "Okay, Bill, I'm here to take you kids to Boys Town." In the doorway stood this strange large man in a stained t-shirt, looking at us with a wicked grin. "The car's waiting downstairs. Are they packed yet?" Seeing this man sent us into a horrible fright, with all of us screaming, and me and Jimmy totally throwing Billy under the bus. "Mommy, please. It was all Billy's fault. He was the one who wanted to smoke. Send him to Boys Town, not us." It was only after my mom started to cry that my father finally came clean. We would not be going this time, and the man in the doorway was a friend of his from the bar that he coached. "Stop crying, because you're not going. But you kids better not forget this," said my dad, "because next time it won't be a joke." I remember my dad and his friend laughing when it was all over like it was some harmless joke. Well, the following Sunday, my mom once again handed us each a quarter for the collection box, saying, "I hope you boys learned your lesson from last week and you go straight to church." We promised her we would, but once again, I found myself in that laundry room watching my brother Billy smoke and imagining yet another black stain on my soul. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a story that was written and performed this last year during our storytelling workshop that we had here. We take time this morning to reflect on our lives, on those things that bring us joy, those that bring us grief, and those things that must be remembered. I invite any of you to come forward to light candles of concern or celebration, to mark your sorrows or your joys. Please come forward now to the candle boxes to light the candle in your memory. This is a meditation. You can use this time for reflection as I read something I wrote a few days ago. My dad died 18 years ago. I still have some of his things, things that remind me. I have the wooden toy puzzle he had as a child in his small farmhouse in southern New Zealand. Before the risk of airport security, I carried his single-blade pocket knife with me, just in case I needed to cut twine or peel an apple. And this reminds me of watching him peel his apple every Sunday dinner after the meal, concentrating on keeping the apple peel in one single strand and then slicing the apple into small pieces that always seemed to taste much sweeter than if I took a bite out of the whole apple. I wear his dark green cardigan with the zipper down the front and 2 pockets. I wear it over my pajamas when I'm wandering around my house doing odd jobs, just like he did. I have the small stuffed animal he would play with when my daughter was young enough to delight in finding it in his pocket or sitting on his shoulder. It's a purple turtle with only one beady eye remaining. I have my father's chin sloping from an unbecoming angle to my neck. I also have my father's sarcastic, biting humor and sharp wit, paired with an inquiring mind that wants to know more about everything. I have his criticism always in my mind, unable to accept praise and reluctant to appreciate others. I carry on his legacy. And I have my father. In an old tin box, originally used for tea leaves, my mother sent me his fine, dusty ashes, along with an Easter basket for my children one year. He sits on my window ledge in my home, where I am reminded of his presence in me, because after all, I have his DNA, along with his pocket knife. My father died 18 years ago. I still have some of his things, things that remind me. What do you carry with you of your father? And what will your children carry with them of you?
You raise me up.
So stories are the basic communication pattern of humans. They make meanings in our lives and they communicate meaning to others. In fact, most of our conversations with other people are spent telling each other stories. If you look at how we entertain ourselves, it mostly comes from creating or engaging in storytelling. And this can be done through reading novels or watching movies or computer role-playing games. When I tell a story, I give information to you that stimulates your senses so you can almost hear the baby cry that I'm talking about, or you can smell the match that I light when I describe it. Stories also stimulate memories in you. So if I tell you a story about me riding on a roller coaster, you'll remember a time that you were riding on a roller coaster. And the more my story activates your senses and generates your memories, the more parts of your brain become engaged. So when neuroscientists do scans or MRIs of brains when people are telling stories, because that's what neuroscientists do, apparently, they find that the same parts of the brain are activated in the person telling the story and the person listening to the story. Their MRIs match. And the more similar the brain patterns are between the two people, the more likely they are to understand each other and enjoy each other. People who are not similar don't have the same areas of their brain stimulated. They don't have the mirror neurons that let them understand each other. And this is important to understand because it gives us some insight about why we sometimes just don't understand people. We can talk to someone who has a different viewpoint and come away feeling from the conversation that we just did not communicate with each other. And an MRI would reveal that's true, that there was very little similarity between the areas of the brain that were activated. And this is especially true if we talk about theory or beliefs, or if we try to persuade someone with logic or statistics. But stories will increase the chance that we'll stimulate similar areas of the brain in people who are different from us because we're activating more of those pathways. In other words, I can have an intellectual discussion with you about my belief that long-term incarceration in a prison is wrong. But this will have far less impact than if I tell you about Jeff. So Jeff is a man I know who was put in prison at the age of 16 for murder. He describes himself as being a punk for his first 17 years in San Quentin, hanging out with gang members and not doing anything much from day to day. Now, at the age of 48, he has been in prison for 32 years. About 15 years ago, one of Jeff's cellmates, an older man, told him that if he didn't learn to identify his authentic self and develop an internal integrity, Jeff was just going to die, having wasted the life he'd been given. And who knows why, but this message resonated with Jeff, and he changed. He started down a path of self-exploration. He does yoga and meditation now. And he came to a new revelation about how he wanted to be in this world. Jeff is now in charge of a program to welcome and integrate all the new prisoners to San Quentin. And he runs a reconciliation group, linking inmates and their victims together to find ways to begin a process of healing and forgiveness between them. The 48-year-old man is not the 16-year-old boy who is incarcerated. So this story of Jeff should stimulate more than your intellectual pathways in your brain. When I tell a story like this, I should cause a physical effect on you. If I was going to examine you, some of you, your heart would be racing a little bit more, you'd be breathing a little bit faster, and your skin temperature would be a little bit warmer. This is the physical effect called transportation, and it means you've begun to feel my story in your body. This transportation is the foundation of empathy and despair. And I'm sure some of you felt that when Stephen was telling his story earlier. When he talked about his father coming up, we sort of all started to feel that in our bodies and have some of the reactions that he had had at the time. This helps us to be social animals because we begin to understand the emotions of other people. Stories are not benign. The stories we hear as a child, that we tell as a culture, and that influence how we interact with the world and the people and the animals of the earth. Let's talk about the stories we tell of fathers in this country. We have ambiguous or even negative narratives about fathers. One article I found was titled, 7 Types of Fathers That Steal Their Kids' Happiness. It lists the way a father can behave that destroy their child's well-being. It's accusatory, and I feel a need to defend and protect men when I read it. And I'm anxious about what this narrative of fathers might result in. If we're not outright negative, we often create narratives that can be limiting, relegating fathers to a role that doesn't account for their whole person. The typical roles we assign fathers to include the following. There's the distant father, who's at work a lot, but even when home, he's reading or not really engaged with the family. There's the overprotective dad, who always knows their child's friends' parents' phone numbers and checks up to know where their child is at all times. There's the handyman dad who fixes everything from plumbing to cars and is always ready to take on a new project. There's the nostalgic dad who's always talking about how things used to be, who's always got a long story to tell, and then dishes out advice at the end of it. There's the gadget-obsessed dad, the trendy dad, the fashion disaster dad, the authoritarian dad, the intimidating dad, the super dad, and the master chef dad, as well as many more. Each of these narratives has an expectation that being a father is somewhat limiting. As long as they're good at something, the father gets a pass on other areas. It's when we acknowledge and examine these stories that we begin to gain agency. When we identify the framework for how we approach life, then we have the choice to decide if that is really how we want to be in the world. So stories matter. I also want to talk briefly about our personal narrative, the story we tell about ourselves. I'm thinking of a patient I know from the Veterans Administration Clinic where I used to work. William suffers from an overwhelming anger. This stems from a terrible war experience he had in Korea, where he was tortured and he witnessed his fellow soldiers shot. He has never forgiven this government for his imprisonment and his trauma. He felt abandoned, and this has defined the rest of his life. William now threatens his neighbors. He yells out his car window at other drivers, and he has no friends. In short, he's created a story about suffering that can never be compensated, so he lives in a world that is hostile. And yet we know others who have told themselves a different story, people like Elie Wiesel, who lived through the Nazi concentration camps, but came out determined that the Nazi story would not be the story of his life. Each of us has a story that we convey to others. We can tell a narrative that traps us into an identity we may or may not want. We can tell a story that keeps people distant or draws them close. We can tell stories that increase each other's stress or that create empathy and caring. Our story can be funny or sad, or it can hold space for both. We get to decide. Let me tell you a story that I heard last time I was at my home congregation. It turns out this story was about me. And here it is. Every Sunday, our congregation has a time to share joys and concerns. This is a time for congregational members to get up and talk about their extraordinary life with others. For years, every time April 9th would roll around, Herb would come to the microphone to announce his celebration of Hugh Hefner's birthday. Herb would extol the role Hefner played in promoting freedom of the press in this country and talk about how Hefner went all the way up to the Supreme Court to defend his right to publish Playboy magazine. Herb touted Hefner as one of the pioneers for free speech. And each time Herb got up to talk, I would feel a little bit agitated. My heart would race and my skin would get warm. And finally, on the third year, when I heard his joy, I couldn't stop myself. I marched up to the microphone and I shared my sorrow about the damage done to woman by Hefner's glorification of our body over our personhood. Now, it turns out there are several endings to this story. And the story I just told you, it ends with my feminist declaration of liberation for women up at the microphone. And another, the story ends with me leaving the microphone, walking down the aisle, right down the center, and being embraced in a big hug by Herb, who understood that we could have different viewpoints, but still be in community with each other. The first ending of the story leaves us with a sense of righteous indignation, with me as confrontational. The second leaves us with a sense of community, a recognition that there is much the same about us, even when we disagree on some things. People meeting me for the first time will anticipate what I am like depending on what end of the story they have heard. We need to pay attention to our stories. They affect those around us, and they also impact how others come to understand us. So here's my questions. What is the story you tell about your father? Is it true? Is it whole? And think about that for a minute. And what are the stories you convey to others about being a father? Do you allow fathers to be complex and whole? And those here who identify as women, we influence the narrative of those who take on a fathering role. Do we tell the stories so they're fair? What is the story about being a father and nurturer that you will leave behind when you're gone? Because the story matters. Blessed be. Please rise if you are willing and able and join me in singing hymn number 1051 in the Teal hymnal.
Amen.
I believe in fathering. I believe in the radical idea that men have the full human capacity to nurture. Hair bows and baseballs, cooking and creativity, tools and tiaras, camping and dancing, snuggles and shrieks of delight. Too many fathers don't believe in their own fathering. Too many are scarred by their own fathers to hear the heart say otherwise. Too many have known fathers who, faced with a quivering lip and tears, could only say, "Man up." Too many have known fathers who knew only yelling and hitting. Too many have known fathers who lost sight of their sacred role of protector and became tormentor. But I believe in fathering. When a human being gestates and gives birth, her brain changes permanently. A father's brain changes permanently too, changes as he rocks his baby to sleep, delights in baby games, and soothes bumps and bruises. A father earns his new neurobiology. In a world where too many mothers hand their co-parent directions more specific than those given to a babysitter, where a father out with his kids is asked, "Are you babysitting?" and "Where's mom?" where fathers are the punchline. I believe in fathering. I believe in the radical idea that men have the full human capacity to nurture. Whether their children come through birth, adoption, or fostering, through scouts, sports, Sunday school, or youth groups. I've known too many gay dads, too many single fathers, too many men raising children others couldn't to believe otherwise. I believe we all, especially our children, deserve to know that the human capacity to nurture belongs to every one of us. I believe in fathering. We extinguish this chalice today, remembering we all are capable of nurturing and bringing healing to this world. Blessed be.